more first actually introduce our presenter for today. Some of you will actually maybe only one of you will know who Cindy Ma is. Cindy is joining us from the United States, but comes from Canada. And is one of our board of directors members and has been on our board of directors for about less than a year, right?
That's
But has been part of our board of advisors for, I can't remember, it was like 2, 3 years, right?
2022, I believe.
2022, good. So you're keeping track. It's and so she is going to be presenting about her family from Canada and about identity, immigration, and kind of family experience. And so, and then following that, we are going to, as usual, have open discussion. So I encourage you all to write questions and comments in the Zoom chat while she's speaking. She's going to speak for like 10 to 15 minutes, and then we're going to open it up to discussion. And I've instructed all of our interns, by all means, participate. Um, but you all are encouraged to participate and ask questions and so on. So, all right, Cindy, go ahead and start. And she's going to be presenting slides.
Great, thank you. So let me share my screen.
Oh, and I think if I remember correctly, let me just check to see who is taking attendance and participation. I believe Olivia, you're marking attendance and participation.
Yeah.
And so Elsa and Owen, who are not with us yet, are going to be taking screenshots. Oh, that's beautiful. Um, great. Okay. Cindy, it's all yours.
Okay, great. So I will start with my family story, and then as we get to discussion, I'll weave in some, information about my professional experience as well, but can also save that for the discussion. So in putting this together, it was both a joy and a bit of a nightmare because of how many pictures I have and trying to think about what narrative to stitch together through the pictures was a challenge, but also really fun to go through. And ultimately, it reminded me of a tradition that we had in my family that we called family film slide night, where for those who may remember, you would take your pictures and put them in 35 millimeter slides and use a projector. And it was like a movie night, and we would go through and look at family pictures. So kind of look at this presentation as my family film slides that I'm sharing with you all. So the picture that we see here are three locations. The mountainous area is Canada, and that's actually in Jasper National Park, and it's a lake called Pyramid Lake. But it's my real picture, so there really are clear waters and reflection. It's beautiful, and it's actually where I got married. And then the top right is a picture of Huizhou, China, where some of my family is from. And then the bottom right is a picture of Jersey. Well, it's a picture of Manhattan, but it's from the perspective of Jersey City, New Jersey, where I lived for many years. So right now, this is a bit of a reflection of my family story. I am by no means a historian, so I would encourage you to visit Simon Fraser University site that has a really excellent overview of Chinese Canadian history overall, but also province by province. But I did want to share a little bit of this history to give an overview of when Chinese people first started arriving in Canada and what the conditions were in that informed and influenced my family coming over from China. So we have 1788, which is the first recorded time where Chinese were brought over by a British fur trader and landed in Vancouver Island of British Columbia. And that was to start building fortresses and ships. And then there was this big gold rush where gold was discovered in the Fraser River on the West Coast and moving inland. And so that brought a lot of immigrants over to work the gold mines. But Chinese were brought over because there were so many other initiatives happening with railway construction and infrastructure that there weren't enough white Canadians to work in all these different projects. So a lot of Chinese arrived in Canada at that point as well. And then through 1885 to 1923, there was a period where you have Chinese in Canada. And, unfortunately, was a period of socioeconomic segregation, and that led to an Immigration Exclusion Act that really made it difficult for the Chinese that were in Canada to bring their family over. There were very limited categories that you could bring your family over. And so there was a long period of family separation. And that was very difficult for the Chinese that were in Canada. Then comes the World Wars. And at that point, there were Chinese Canadians who wanted to serve on behalf of Canada. And there was some resistance. I think initially thinking that after they serve, then they will have to be given status and greater acceptance. But that really did lead to repealing that Exclusion Act in 1947. And 1962, immigration was open to the Chinese. So that is the period. Of course, there's more since then, but that's sort of the period that informed when my family started coming into Canada. So this is my family in Canada. In the lower right is my great grandfather, and he is the earliest known family ancestor who arrived in Canada on my paternal side. And so what I know of his history is that he ran a restaurant in Winfield, Alberta, which is outside of Edmonton, Alberta, where I was born. And he brought my father to Canada in the 1950s after the Chinese Immigrant Act was repealed. And it really allowed for Chinese Canadians to sponsor other family members, including adult children and aging parents as well. So I grew up having him there, and that started, I guess, sort of chain of migration over to Canada, where my father had sponsored his family over. And so on the right, lower right picture is my father with the tie, my great grandfather, and my uncle, my father's younger brother. On the upper left here are a picture of my mother in the red pants holding my older brother, her mother, my grandmother, and her sister, my aunt, and my younger brother. Um, in the middle there is just family picture celebrating my great grandfather's birthday, and I am one of four siblings, so we are all captured here. And I would say throughout the late 70s and 80s, the rest of my parents' family were sponsored and emigrated to Canada, with the exception of a paternal aunt who I'll introduce in a little bit. On my mother's side, what I know are that she had two grandfathers that actually came to the US to work, running a laundromat, working on a cruise ship as a chef, making money, sending it back home to to China, but ultimately moved back to China, where they were able to have a better life, I think, because of their time making money in the West. Okay. So growing up in Canada, have my map of Canada here for those who aren't familiar. We're sitting on above the US. And the parts that I've circled there is the province of Alberta, where I'm was born, and the city of Edmonton, which is the capital city of Alberta. And it is the northernmost capital city of the provinces, minus the two territories up top. But in the 70s and 80s, Canada's population at the time was around 21 million. For such a large country, it's really a small population. And about 60% or so, majority of them live in Ontario, Quebec. And the majority of Canadians also live closer to the US border, partly because of weather and climate. It's warmer, it is cold where I grew up. But today, Canada's population is about 41.5 million, so it's about doubled. And it is the second largest country by total area. And in Edmonton, when I was growing up, the population was about 450,000, and today it's about 1.2 million. So it has also grown in that period of time. On the close-up map on the right, I just have these flags. I have the city of Edmonton here. And this arrow here, this flag here is Winfield, where my great-grandfather had his restaurant and where my father grew up working with him until he went to school in Edmonton. And the flags here are the Canadian Rocky Mountains, so Jasper National Park and Banff National Park, which featured a lot in my upbringing as well. So I wanted to point them out. So, growing up in Western Canada, Alberta is one of what we call the three prairie provinces, which are like the Midwest. But in Alberta, as I showed you, we had the Rocky Mountains. So, I grew up thinking that we had a pretty typical Canadian childhood, playing with our neighborhood friends, annual camping trips, snowy winters. The bottom picture here, probably every Canadian kid in our area has a picture like this where the snow was really high um, and a lot of shoveling. But upon reflection, I realized it was maybe typical, but it was atypical for a Chinese family. And so I did come to realize that not all Chinese families like mine went camping and fishing like we did. And on the lower right here, we have our camping setup. And it wasn't until maybe junior high or maybe between 10, 11, 12 years old that I became a little bit more conscious that we weren't your typical camping family. We would often draw onlookers as we set up camp and inquiries as to what we ate over the campfire. We had one person literally come onto our campsite and ask in a non not with any malintent, but he did ask, do we eat sweet and sour pork over the campfire? And I just remember my young self thinking, hot dogs, we roast hot dogs and pork and beans like everybody else. But people would come and ask how my dad set everything up. And I think somebody asked my dad if he worked in a restaurant. And my dad was an electrical engineer. And so that's why he was able to rig our van up and just, do a lot of things himself. But my parents and my father in particular really emphasized being quote unquote Canadian, and they didn't put us in any Chinese language school as many of my Chinese friends were. He didn't want us to be discriminated against with accented English, which he felt for him. He went to high school. By the time he arrived in Canada, he entered into high school, went to university, but he always felt that perhaps his career was a little bit held back at the time because he had accent in English, which I didn't think he really did. But that was an approach that I would say some immigrant families have when they land in Canada or wherever is that they want their children to become of that place. And then I have other friends who their parents would want to make sure that they are maintaining their heritage and their language. But I did grow up speaking Cantonese, which is a dialect that my family spoke. I did grow up speaking it up until I started going to kindergarten and school, at which point I started learning English. So my parents and ancestors are from Guangdong province in China. So I mentioned we speak Cantonese and another dialect, Toisanese. And what during some of the stories that I remember my dad sharing, he shared some stories with us. And actually, I had to learn new stories through my husband because I think our dad didn't want to share any scary stories with us as we were growing up. But as an adult, he would relate it to my husband and I would learn about them for the first time. So one of which was during World War II. My paternal grandmother was an internal refugee in China trying to flee the Chinese occupation. And my dad remembers his mom running and jumping into a canal with him on her back when they were attacked by a Japanese aircraft. And he also remembers in their village that they had to house a communist soldier. Every home had to house a communist soldier when the Communist Army had occupied southern China. So he remembers them taking their front door off and setting it up as a bed for the soldier. My mother also left for Hong Kong when she was a baby, but it wasn't war motivated. It was more because of regional family migration. And then she ultimately followed other family members to Canada when she was about 10 years old. And so, again, as I mentioned, though my parents didn't really push Chinese language on us, out of all of my siblings, I was the most interested in heritage seeking. So I studied Mandarin in university, and then through eventual work opportunities, I traveled to China several times. And one of the times I was able to finally meet my paternal aunt and family in Huizhou, which in this picture here is about 90 minutes outside of Guangzhou. I was in Guangzhou for a conference. So this is my family in China that I was able to meet. But the connecting piece on the bottom left here is my paternal grandmother, who she came to Canada in, I think about 1980 or so, in the late 70s, early 80s. And I think at that point I had grown up with my maternal grandmother. And so getting a second grandmother was strange for us. But it was, and she came to live with us for a few years. But my aunt, who is in this top left picture here, she's to my right. She's the oldest of my father's also. There are four children, and my father was the oldest, and then this aunt in China was the second oldest. So she hosted my husband and I, where in Huizhou, where I had just wrapped up a conference. And I got to experience this new family connection, looking into the faces of people who looked like my grandmother, my aunt, my dad. In this upper right picture here, I got to see my grandmother's wedding chest. And I wasn't really prepared to think about how we shared my grandmother, because I think for me, I grew up thinking she was my grandmother, and I didn't have this sense that she was a grandmother to any other grandchildren, except our family. But going there and really seeing this was revelatory, I think. And in this bottom center picture here, the first day we were treated to family home cooking, and my cousins and aunt had told us that they spent about 2, 3 days planning a menu of what they were going to cook and serve for us. And they wanted to show us what they ate. But what I discovered was a lot of the dishes tasted surprisingly similar because I realized they were dishes that my grandmother probably taught them and they continued to cook. But then when she came to Canada, she made for us. So it was really interesting to discover these similarities. Um, it did make me reflect on what my life might have been had I grown up in China. And I think in the pictures, one thing we joke about is that I am taller than them. And my mother is petite, my father, maybe about 5'6". But all of us growing up, we had the benefit of different nutrition, milk, having access to milk and, proteins and things. And so we are a bit taller than a lot of my relatives. So now, fast forwarding, well, mixed in there is my immigration to the US. So I got married in Canada, but moved to the US with my American husband. He was working in Canada at the time, but we moved because of work and school opportunities. But I'm the only one that has left my family, and everybody else is in Canada. So we landed in New Jersey, where his mother was living. And on my husband's side, I have family living in Minnesota, Illinois, Tennessee, and Florida, highlighted here. So this is my family in the US. My transition to the US was both slow and fast. I think because of the many similarities between Canada and the US, including language, a lot of pop culture. A lot of people think it's easy. It would be an easy transition, but and I felt the same way too, but it's almost like an alternate universe. Um, because we share the same language, but there are some differences. A lot of, the Canadian English that we learn is based on British English, spelling, things like that, and some pronunciation. Stores, everything we would see, we get a lot of US media. So growing up, listen to US, music and shows. And and sorry, did I lose you?
No, we can still hear you.
And can you see my screen?
Yes. We see a family in the US and it looks like a kind of a screenshot of
Okay.
something.
Sorry, because my something about my monitor just went off. I apologize.
Yeah, I see we see that. For some reason it's do you yeah, I don't know
Stop
if you
sharing for 1 second.
yeah,
And but my camera's off. I apologize. I do not know what happened here. Um,
technical
but I
glitches happen.
can share, go back to this. This is my last slide here.
Yep.
So can you see the
Yes.
family in the US now?
Yep.
Okay. Um, so I have family in US. I think the thing I don't know too, but as I was putting this together, my family in the US looks very different than my family in Canada. And so I have when I first arrived in the US, it was a bit of culture shock for sure, both being in the US, but then also marrying into a family culture that was very different from mine. My mother-in-law's from Tennessee, and she's one of 11 children, so it's big family. And every year they would have a family reunion in Tennessee that I would attend, and that really opened up my eyes to uh, a different American experience in the South. And so a lot of her family is spread across, if I could circle more points on the map, Arkansas and Kentucky and the Carolinas, so all across the southern states there. Um, the other thing that was also um, new for me was marrying into a blended family. So my husband had two young kids at the time from his first marriage. So I became a stepmother at a younger age. And now my stepdaughter and stepson are grown and they have kids of their own. So I'm a grandmother of four. And so that's also part of my identity as well. And yeah, it's been a very rich and um, layered experience, I would say. And Just move here. And the last slide is just really, as I was putting this together, it really made me reflect on a sense of place, the sense of place that people have. And um, especially in today's context, I think there's so many things changing, so much discussion around um, both immigration, but also where people are from. I think it's always been difficult for me to explain where I'm from when I'm asked. And in my professional life, where I worked in international education for several years, I had the opportunity to travel to other countries and meet and work with people from other cultures. And I would often get asked the question, where are you from? And it wasn't an easy answer, I think. As you get older and you add more layers to your life and shaping your sense of yourself, my answers, I think, changed a little bit every time I was asked. But it was a but putting this together, I think, was really interesting and fun for me, and just thinking about my personal experience, which I think is both common for people who have immigrated to other countries and unique in the way that it unfolded because of my parents' choices and their philosophy, and then the choices I made to also leave for another country, albeit my transition was a lot easier than I think my parents. But my experience, I think, growing up as a second generation children of immigrants is different than I'm seeing my niece and nephews as third generation children are. Just this sense, maybe a little bit less sense of being bicultural, but being fully aware that they have a very multifaceted family. So that is the end of my presentation. Thank you for allowing me to share my family story. I'm going to stop sharing my screen right now.
Awesome, Cindy. This was a remarkably well prepared presentation. So really appreciate the time that you put into that. We're opening it up for discussion. I am scrolling through, see no questions or comments. But if you could raise as Adrian just did, raise your digital hand and let us know what thoughts, comments, and questions you have. Adrian.
Thank you. Thank you for the presentation. It was fantastic. I thoroughly enjoyed it. Um, the line you left off on actually segues perfectly into my question about your nieces and nephews, less feeling bicultural, more like a multifaceted family. Um, my question would be, I know that some studies show that, language learning of an immigrant family kind of peters out after that second generation. Do you see that very commonly? And do you see less of an emphasis on heritage seeking, like after that, that second generation of moving somewhere?
Mhm. It's such an interesting question because um, two of my nephews, they are mixed race, so part Chinese, part Canadian, or part Caucasian. And I don't know if it's the time of where we're in our economic, development and culture, but Chinese language and Mandarin in particular is really popular for people to take. So interestingly, actually all of my nieces and nephews um, went to a bilingual school for elementary and junior high, so learning Mandarin and English as well. So that's interesting, but it's also interesting that they're studying Mandarin, which our family doesn't speak. And so what I find interesting, because I did study some Mandarin in university, I was able to converse with them a little bit or just have some light conversation. But my sister isn't able to because it's not the dialect that she knows, and the rest of my family as well. Although now so many things are in Mandarin that you're watching shows, Chinese dramas or what have you, that, my mom is learning her Mandarin through watching Chinese content. And I will say my aunt and uncle who came to the US, came to Canada, retained some Mandarin language as well. So there is some ability to have some conversation. But in our family, in this situation, I don't know that they took the language out of heritage seeking, but they took it out of its sort of what everybody was doing, but also what would set you up for this perceived success in life, being able to know Mandarin and speak Mandarin as well. But it is interesting that they're having this mix because when they're going to bilingual school, a lot of the other students are Chinese. And so their experience is they're growing up with this kind of a firm identity in a way that I didn't have growing up because I was in the minority at my school. And, I just went to my local school and I would say I had a lot of Asian friends as well, but I just had mixed group of friends. So, I don't know if it's an individual thing or I think it's an individual thing as it was with me that I was particularly more interested in heritage seeking. And I also think there's influence of the parents and the family as well as to how much they want their children to retain language and other cultural elements. I will say though, even though we didn't go to Chinese language school, my life at home was very much a mix of quote unquote Canadian living, but also Chinese customs and living. So we celebrated a lot of all the Chinese holidays, observed a lot of those traditions, and but then our holiday meals, like Christmas meals and Thanksgiving, would be a blend of Chinese food and Western food, as is the case, I think, with a lot of immigrant families or just families from different cultures.
Hmm. Before we go to Joe, let me take a screenshot of everybody as I usually do. So if you could turn on your cameras, for those of you who have them off, Maria, Nusrat, Elias, Cassandra, and Samuel, if you can turn on your cameras, we'd much appreciate it. On three, I'm going to ask you to smile. One, two, three, smile. Fantastic. Let me do that again because I think Elias, did not see you initially. Hold on a second. On three, one, two, three, smile. And Maria, I just realized actually we have you on two different, I think on your phone and your yeah. So Joseph is next, but by all means, I'd love to hear from our interns who usually do not speak, but we'd love to hear your perspectives. And Adrian, actually, even before we get to Joe, your own family is, I mean, I'm assuming you asked that question in part because your own family is, well, from Jamaica and you guys are experiencing this transition, where you're, I guess, second generation, right? Or first generation. I can't remember how it goes. So do you want to explain, like, what in your own experience, the answer to your own question, based on your experience of Jamaican families in the US?
Yeah, for sure. For me, I think I tap more into the half Hispanic side of me because Spanish is such a prevalent language. And there is a big population of what people call no sabo kids. That they come from either Spanish speaking households or Spanish speaking heritage and they don't speak Spanish. So I think I think you're right, Dr. Lashley, a first generation because yeah, parents of immigrants, and I was born in the US. And I'm learning Spanish in school formally because I want to learn it. Um, and there's so many people that if they don't take it formally, they just don't know Spanish. So we do see that language kind of peter out. And some immigrants, similar to what you were explaining, some immigrants want their kids to, immerse themselves in the culture of which they moved. And some of them really want them to hold on to the culture. So, yeah, my experience, especially with my peers, I see a huge mixture of both. Some that don't know any Spanish, some that are learning it formally, and some that learned it in the household. So I was just curious where, another perspective might come in.
Mm,
Thank you.
yeah. Um, Joe, then Cassandra.
Cindy, nice to see you. It was awesome. I have a lot of questions, so I'm going to try and narrow it down to two. But I wanted to say that I worked as an educator in New York schools, and Mandarin is really one of the primary languages that's taught now. Over, it used to be Spanish, of course, and then Mandarin is second. Um, so I was curious about the. My understanding is that there's a huge difference between Hong Kong and the rest of the country, and it has a special sovereignty. And I wanted to know if living there, you experienced difference. How does it feel? Like, do you know what I mean? It's like got its own
Mhm.
government, and it's. I don't. I wondered about the connection between the Hong Kong and the rest of the country.
So I haven't lived there myself. I've traveled there for work, but both my parents did, but they lived there before 1997, before Hong Kong was
Mm,
handed back to China as a special administrative region. And so it was, I can't say for sure, but I have a sense that it was different because it was its own unique place. It was British colony, a very international global hub. You can go and there are parts where you're experiencing just a mixture of and a confluence of cultures because of its location and port trading, all of that. It just brought a lot of different cultures there. And so you could see that in the food and in the language too. A lot of people spoke English there as well. And the stories that I hear from my parents and my mom in particular, it's like New York City in a way where you go and the city never sleeps, I think.
mm,
And you can go out and walk out your street and find anything. When I went to China, so just on my own experience, when I started traveling to China for work, I it the feel is very different. Even going to Shanghai or Beijing versus Hong Kong, it's a different type of cosmopolitan feeling. I have to think about how best to describe it, but also very modern, but very Chinese. Whereas in Hong Kong, it is a lot more, I guess, just international feeling. Maybe this
mm,
difference
mm.
between going to New York City and then going to another big US city. There's just something about New York that, with just this mixture of cultures too, that make it a unique experience.
Hmm.
Okay.
And Joe, I imagine you have other questions, but would love to hear not only from Cassandra but from others who are not from the United States and who may have kind of your own perspectives. So would love to hear, for instance, from Mohammed, who's joining us. If I remember correctly, are you in India, Mohammed Rafiq? Oh, you're muted. Oh, I think you're in Bangladesh. I'm sorry. Is you're muted, so we can't hear you.
Oh, sorry, sir. Thank you so much, sir. I'm from Bangladesh, from the world largest Rohingya refugee camp. As you know, most of the Rohingya people are suffering with different challenges. We originally from Myanmar, but in 2017 we have to flee from Myanmar to Bangladesh to save our life. So at this camp here, uh,
Oh, I think we can hear you. We I think we can hear you, but we might have lost, let me see here. We might have lost connection to him. Um so I don't know if you heard that, and it may be also that he has headphones on, which tend to kind of interfere with the connection or the your our ability to hear him. But in any case, so Muhammad is a Rohingya refugee from Burma or Myanmar, living currently in Bangladesh. So he has his own kind of like immigrant, well, actually refugee experience. So hopefully he can come back and share. Um, so we'll go to Cassandra and then to Maria and her mom, who are joining us from Brazil. But would love to hear from others of you. Elias, I don't know where you're joining us from. Lemon, uh, um, Cedric, and others who are Joshua, etc., who are joining us from other countries. We'd love to hear from you. So please raise your hand. Cassandra.
Hi, Cindy. That was an awesome presentation. It's really fun to hear your stories. I am wondering if you've noticed any differences in how people talk about race or identity in Canada versus the US. I mean, they're so close together, but I'd love to hear your perspective on those differences. Um, and then, yeah, we'll start there. I do have another question if there's time, but
Great. Yes, actually, I think when Adrian was speaking, I came to mind that there is a difference that I've experienced growing up in Canada as a Chinese, Chinese heritage versus growing up in the States or the people that I know who grew up here who are Asian. And I don't know if Paul noticed, but throughout my most of my life, my professional life, when people ask me where I'm from, I often just say I'm Canadian. And I find that with a lot of my friends who are maybe ethnically, not Caucasian, but we identify as Canadian. I don't know if that's the same these days, but growing up, I would always say I'm Canadian. And then that invariably would then lead to, but where are you really from? And where are your parents from? And so there's a sense like I didn't grow up hearing Chinese Canadian or Canadian Chinese. We're just Canadian. And then being Asian American here is different, I think, because you really hold this Asian identity. If you identify as Asian American, then you are saying you're Asian first and American. Whereas I feel in Canada growing up, and again, maybe things are slightly changing now, but growing up, really it wasn't until maybe again junior high or so when I started experiencing maybe being othered, quote unquote, and having people ask these things because for most of my life it was just I understood that we were Chinese, but I played with a wide range, of friends, and had a really diverse group of friends. And in Canada, all the different cultures are really integrated into daily life a lot more than I see here. So, granted, Canada's population is a lot smaller, but given the breadth of the country, you'll go to the grocery store, and yes, there are the international aisles where you have that, but they're quite big. But then in the produce section, you'll just find Chinese produce or something that you wouldn't necessarily find here. And on menus at the local diners, you'll have your eggs and your hamburgers and sandwiches, but you'll also have Chinese dishes there. And now when I go back to visit my family pretty much annually, I am always amazed to see how blended things are. So you'll just have business people, non-Asian business people going for dim sum for lunch, and that's the quick lunch that they'll have, or going to a Vietnamese restaurant, truckers, or people that for me, it's striking a little bit because I don't necessarily see that here. And there is a Chinatown, but in Edmonton, it's more diffused now. So a lot of that is interspersed, and so there are these subtle differences, I think, between the U.S. and Canada, but I think also it's of the time. So my father experienced a lot more racism than we did. I think he sheltered us a little bit from that as well. But the timing of when he arrived in Canada and where he was in a small town and what he experienced was pretty, I would say pretty severe and on a regular basis, being called out and identified and targeted because he was Chinese. And I think that was a lot of the motivation for him to try to give us a different experience and not maybe reduce the number of things that would differentiate us in a way. Whether that was the right call or not, as we got older, sometimes he expressed regret that he didn't put us into Chinese language school. Um, but these are the choices that families make.
Mm. Wow. Maria and her mom from Brazil.
Hello, everyone. Oops,
Hi.
sorry. We'll have to.
Oh, you're
I think now it's okay. Um, well, first, thank you, Cindy, for the presentation. It was very interesting to learn a bit about your history. I was not translating everything for my mom today because we found out a tool here on the computer. So it's being translated for her to Portuguese directly. So she's reading it. And I feel like it's so much better because every meeting I feel like I lost valuable details about what people are speaking. And so today I feel like she could understand everything and listen to everything. So, and we were talking about, I think we have a question, but I think you kind of already answered it. But we wanted to know a little bit more about it. When you first met your family, a part of your family in China, was there anything that shocked you at first, that made you realize, not realize, but change your perspective of belonging and your perspective of your identity, because you were sharing that you had this interest in keeping your Chinese culture alive,
Mhm.
and we would just wanted to know if there was anything that really clicked for you when you first met them. Thanks.
Thank you. I I do put a I do realize that because I place importance on this for myself, that I found I probably held unrealistic expectations for myself to show up a certain way and be what I thought being Chinese meant. And I came to realize that people didn't people who knew me or my family didn't come to see me this way, that they accepted that I was a foreigner, but I didn't get that. I thought that I look Chinese, and so you might just make an assumption that I'm like everybody else. And so I think when I met them, my aunt in Canada and my dad, I think, had prepared them to say, don't expect her to know all the different customs. Don't expect her to do all these things. So in Asian culture, it's very customary to do a lot of gift giving. You never show up at someone's house without something, fruit, gifts, and all that. So I had prepared gifts. And also this is a tradition growing up in my family, but also in my work life, going to travel to different countries. There's this tradition exists in a lot of other places as well. So I had prepared a lot of gifts, but I do think that the gifts I brought, I was trying to give them a taste of things that they wouldn't be able to get there, but were still somewhat appropriate. Um, but I think when we just met, it was just a really an emotional experience. We were just looking at each other because we're trying to find the resemblance in each other. They're looking at me and seeing my father, my grandmother in me, and looking at them, I realized I see my aunt, and then um, I see my Canadian family in them as well. Um, and so living their life, they opened up their home to me, and I just got this taste of what daily living might look like, the relationships they had. And so my three female cousins, um, they at the time, fell under the one child policy, so they could only have two of them only had a daughter each. And those daughters were considered each other, though they were cousins, they considered themselves sisters. They were kind of close in age. So just having that experience as a short visit, but looking at their house, going through their daily routines, having them show me what, the environment that they lived in, yeah, it just made me think about the differences in how I grew up and what it would have been like to grow up there. And there are times when I kind of wish I did. I kind of wish I did grow up there and then came to Canada or the US later, because I think there's a difference when you are of a place that maybe is more ethnically homogenous and you don't question your identity. You are my cousins in China, they are Chinese. But for me, my answer is a lot more complex. And I encountered that a lot in my work life, meeting different people who were from other Asian countries, but just in other countries. And I felt like we connected and related uh, on different cultural elements, but I think what I just didn't share was just this really more solid, homogenous sense of place.
Mm, mm. So we have not all that much time left, but I want to get to Tammy quickly, if you and Cindy, if you can try to give
Mhm.
short answers, but also to Lemon. And if you have not actually told us where or introduced yourself in the Zoom chat, it'd be great to hear what city and country you're joining us from. So Elias, um, Lemon as well, if you could tell us what city and country you're joining us from. Olivia, I'm assuming you're keeping track of everybody who comes in and out and so on of these the meeting. But I think we know where you guys are from. And Samuel, I can't remember where you're joining us from. And John, I know you're joining us from Kenya. But if the rest of you, I'm not sure exactly where you're from. And there are a couple of other people. I'm kind of losing track. But in any case, um, before actually Tammy goes. I'd like to take another screenshot. Sorry, but there are now more of you on screen, so it's good to kind of make sure we properly represent everybody. So, Brianna, John, Samuel, Maria, not Maria because I think she's on screen. But Samuel, if you could turn on your video, and likewise, Mohammed and Joshua, good to see you. On three, one, two, three, smile. And let me do that again. Hold on a second, because Brianna just joined us. Hold on a second. And Nikki, if you could turn on your camera. One, two, three, smile. Fantastic. Thanks, guys. Tammy.
Hi, Cindy. I know we're getting a little short on time, so I'll try to be quick. But first of all, you have such a beautiful family, so thank you for that lovely presentation. I was wondering because you have a lot of Chinese traditions, and then you grew up in Canada, and then you moved to the U.S. How any of those traditions may have evolved or blended with the others, and how they came into play when you were helping to raise your stepchildren.
I try to maintain them here for myself, even though, my husband is Caucasian and my family here. So, but I will celebrate Lunar New Year if I'm not in Canada to celebrate it with my family, I'll do something here. And it's an opportunity for me to share that and maybe just some education as well about how things are celebrated. And there was one time, I don't know how to explain this, what if it's like quote unquote color blindness, but when my granddaughters were young in elementary school and I was talking to them and they said, "Oh, in school today we learned about Lunar New Year and Chinese New Year." And they call me Mimi because I'm not ready to be called Granny. And so then my husband said, Mimi's Chinese. And they looked up at me and they're like, "What?" Like it didn't compute for them that I wasn't anything other than their Mimi. So that was interesting at the time. But then, I've sort of since continued that. And so for here, I'll adapt, some of the celebrations for my family here so that they can just experience it and partake in it as well. And then when I'm with my family up in Canada to do this. I feel like we have this blend where we don't go all the way that some families do when we do things like there's like an annual visit. You visit your ancestors at the cemetery, and there's a whole ceremony that you do where you're making offerings and all that. So we do that as well, but over time, maybe it just becomes a little bit more abbreviated, but it's still very much something that we retain to do.
Great, Cindy.
There's so much more, but I know we don't have a lot of time.
Yeah,
Thank you.
exactly. And I do want to get to Lemon Kennedy Quancom, who's I don't know where he's joining us from, but if you could tell us what city and country you're joining us from and whatever you'd like to share.
Okay. Yeah. Good evening. Good day. Yeah. This is Lemon Kennedy. I'm based in Cameroon, in a town called Bamenda, the third largest city or town in Cameroon. Unfortunately, we are in a armed conflict situation which has been running for the past 9 years. This is as a result of the cultural differences between the language, English and French. So for now, we are almost paralyzed. The English people speaking regions of Cameroon, they have some separatist group which have fighting with the central administration. So we are suffering. We are suffering. Of late, due to limited health facilities, I lost my wife September 23rd, and the burial took place 2 weeks ago. It's my pleasure being here, and I will continue to be there and wish to learn more and benefit from your own and other partners. God bless you all. Thank you.
Lemon, thank you for joining us. Did you lose your wife to the conflict between the English and French speaking
It,
portions of your country?
it was not directly linked, but with limited health facilities, she could not be vividly attended to.
Mm,
And we needed some sort of medical evacuation, but she did not live to be taken to the Moy Teaching and Referral Hospital. But the situation has a multiplier effect
yeah,
on us and the population.
yeah. Lemon, I'm glad you're here in part because Chia, one of our family diplomats, who's also with us, but who lives in United Arab Emirates, is, I'm sure, interested in what you're saying because he comes from Cameroon and fled Cameroon because of the conflict. And so this is subject for a whole different conversation. And perhaps I think just like Mohammed, who's joining us from the refugee camp in Bangladesh, it would be good to have you perhaps present on what's happening in Cameroon and how it impacts your family in this coming year, because we really are interested in kind of not just sharing about families in relatively stable politically and countries, but also families that are in unstable countries, because we need to hear from all families. So I hope you stick with us, even though this is the last dialogue of the year. We will be having more dialogues next year, and in fact, this is probably a good transition time for me to kind of close off this meeting. Next year, we will be continuing these dialogues from March to November, just like we did this year, once per month. Um, Unfortunately, we don't provide material support. We can't provide scholarships for people to come to the United States or anything like that. But we do provide a platform for people from different walks of life across the world to talk about family and the struggles that families are facing, the interesting kind of challenges, also the I mean, as and in Cindy's case, kind of happy moments and so on, and other kinds of situations. So we want to very much hear from the diversity of families out there. So Lemon, we hope to, contact me. You can contact me on Facebook, and you've got my name. And you're going to be you're on our email list, so you'll be getting more contact from me, and you should feel free to contact me. So. Um, I want to thank Cindy again for what was a remarkably kind of this is I guess why you were an executive of a she was an executive of an international exchange organization called the Institute for International Education. I'm probably butchering the name slightly, or Institute of International Education. So we're honored to have her on our board of directors. And clearly she knows how to do presentations. So thank you. Thank all of you for your participation in these meetings. It's the last one of this year, but as I mentioned, we'll be continuing next year. And we are going to have new kind of things happening. I'll be sharing out announcements about new things developing with the Family Diplomacy Initiative in 2026. So for those of you who are family diplomacy ambassadors, stay on the line. We're on the same Zoom. The rest of you, see you soon. See you next year in some cases. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everyone.